should never join the euro, but this policy of culling badgers is a huge mistake. It's obvious. It's obvious. All you have to do is read some of the papers that have been written about this over the last 15 or 20 years. Well, here are the facts as I understand them. The last government spent £53 million conducting the world's biggest badger cull, only to prove that culling badgers didn't work in reducing TB in cattle. They proved that it didn't work, and the leading scientists of this country in that field wrote papers to explain why that was the case. The efficiency in reducing TB in cattle by culling badgers at the very best is 12 to 16% efficiency over 9 years. That means after 9 years we'll still have 85% of the problem. Tens of thousands of badgers are dead, millions and millions of pounds have been spent, and we'll still have 85% of the problem. The government says that the problem costs us £100 million a year. Well, we'll still be spending £85 million a year in 9 years' time after these culls. So it really isn't that effective. The other thing, of course, is perturbation, which is the scientific effect that's been explained earlier on tonight as well, in which infected badgers move around when the culls commence, and they can actually spread the disease through other populations. Badgers don't normally move around very much, but when you disturb their populations, they start to move around, and you can actually get more TB in the surrounding areas, which means the farms around the culling zones will be infected even more than they were before. Finally, the independent scientific group and Lord Krebs advised that culling should not form a part of bovine tuberculosis control in the future. That was their findings. From tens of millions of pounds spent, tens of thousands of badgers culled. That's what they came up with. So why is the government pursuing this crazy policy? It's on that basis that I authored a paper on the subject with the Bow Group, which is a centre-right think tank based in London. And the aim really of the Bow Group is to try and get the message across to politicians about bad policy as well as good policy, to support the good policy, to try and get them to change their minds on bad policy. Brian May, who is speaking later on tonight, was very kind in writing the foreword to that paper, and we got it distributed around as many ministers and MPs. It got to number 10, it got to all of the Liberal Democrat cabinet members, it got to all the Conservative cabinet members. We tried to get the message out there. We held some meetings in Parliament, we did some public meetings, just to try and get the word out there really amongst the politicians, because I feel that politicians are actually misinformed about this issue. When you ask them about it, they tell you that, well, it's almost a human versus animal battle. Well, it's not that at all. I challenged Nick Clegg on this, and he told me that, oh well, he's seen people cry, grown men crying over this issue, and that, you know, we have to stop TB because all these cattle are being slaughtered. Nobody is disagreeing with him that we need to stop TB. We have to do something about it. But there are other ways. Now, one of those ways, of course, is to vaccinate. And there's a fantastic vaccination study going on in Gloucestershire as we speak. It's early days for vaccination, but what they've shown is that they can reduce TB in the badger population by 74% by vaccinating a proportion of the badgers. I don't think that's too bad. 74% reduction in TB in badgers by vaccinating just a proportion of the badger population. Now, on the subject of culling, of course, 80% is the efficiency of the skin test for BTB in cattle. That means that not only are thousands of TB positive cattle being missed, but also we're slaughtering lots and lots of cattle that don't have TB at all. They never did. It's 80% efficient, which is a huge margin of error, 20%, when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of cattle being tested every year. The tests in the randomised badger culling trial showed that 12 to 15% of badgers in the wild have TB, which is a small percentage. Now, if we could get a vaccination going out there amongst our wild population of badgers, imagine how much we could reduce the amount of TB in badgers in the wild population. Biosecurity, as Steve picked up on, this is perhaps the most important factor. Now, some scientists question that badgers can pass on TB to cattle at all, and it's actually easy to see why they would do that, because it's hard to imagine, isn't it, a badger sneezing and a cow catching a cold. It's far more likely, of course, as anyone who's been long haul in a plane recently knows, that actually when you're in a room full of lots and lots of other people in a small space, you can pick up a cold quite easily. Tens of thousands of cattle in this country are kept indoors all winter long, in very confined quarters. Any time cows are moved around the country, they're kept in small lorries, and they're moved for hours and hours. So if one of those cows has TB, it's obvious that that's going to spread to the other animals in that shed or in that lorry. So biosecurity is a really, really important factor here, and it's a factor that's almost being ignored. And then finally, free shooting is going to be very expensive. And of course, it's going to be very, very dangerous indeed. As has been mentioned, they're going to be using very high-powered rifles. It's very difficult to kill a badger. They're very low to the ground, they're very bony, and you've got to get them as they're in a certain position. Now imagine they're going to be doing that in the dark. Badgers, as soon as they hear a pin drop, they're off. It's going to be extremely difficult to actually enforce this cull, which means they might well end up having to put them in traps and kill them that way. Now, if they're putting them in traps, they might as well vaccinate them. It's not a lot more money. The Welsh Assembly government dropped their culling policy at the beginning of this year in favour of a vaccination policy. One of the problems with vaccination, the government has stated, is that it's too expensive. Well, why is it too expensive? It's because nobody's doing it. There are lots of people selling guns, but how many people sell those vaccination kits? Just the fact that Wales is now going to be vaccinating their badgers means that those kits are going to be cheaper. That means that farmers in England, in the southwest, are going to be able to buy those kits. They're going to be able to vaccinate their badgers on their land much more easily. But perhaps the most important political struggle we've got is changing the European law. At the minute, we cannot sell cows from our herds in this country into Europe if they test positive for TB. Now that sort of makes sense. The problem is that when you vaccinate an animal for TB and then do a test on them, they test positive. So we need to get change in the European Parliament. The earliest opportunity for that is 2015. That's when the laws that are being decided on now get written up and passed into law. So I know we're going to be talking about how you can get in touch with your MPs locally, but also write to your MEP. Locally, they're Ashley Fox, who lives in Bristol, Julie Girling and Giles Chichester. Julie is actually the agriculture spokesman for the Conservative Party. Write to her. Tell her what you feel about changing European law to make sure that this is debated and this goes through. That's really, really important, because it won't just affect animals in this country, it'll affect animals all over Europe and will make culling completely void in the rest of Europe. Cost, here's another thing. Now, that's estimated at £4.5 million per area. Now, they're quite big areas, but the Association of Chief Police Officers and the Home Office, they got together and they started thinking about the extra costs of policing. Now, a lot of police have been doing a lot of overtime because of the Olympics. They want to go on holiday now, so there's going to be a lot of overtime. A lot of these culls are going to be at night. It's going to be extremely expensive. The extra cost of policing the culls will be £4 million per area. That almost doubles the cost. And that's just because none of us want the cull. So of course, everyone's going to be protesting the cull. If we switch to vaccination, who's got an issue with that? They won't need to spend that extra money on policing. The Welsh Assembly government actually estimated the cost of policing for a cull area almost £2,000 per badger. Per badger? That's an awful lot of money to spend on a ridiculous policy. We calculated actually that that in order to cover the extra costs of policing, the areas would need to be much larger than they are at the minute, at least 450 square kilometres, in order just to cover the extra costs of policing. And that's simply not going to happen. Why? Because in order to enforce a cull, you need natural boundaries. Natural boundaries, of course, don't replicate all across the country. We have one in the Severn. That's about it. Badgers constantly cross motorways and so on. There isn't really such thing as a boundary to a badger. In fact, Pauline, who I've spoken with before on a stage like this, she's seen badgers swimming across rivers. Apparently, badgers are great swimmers. So perhaps even the Severn won't make the culling a fair test for the government. The biggest cost, though, of course, is going to be the delay to finding a permanent solution to TB. And this is really, really important. We're now going to be focusing on culling if the government gets its way. What we need to be focusing on is a permanent solution for TB. Otherwise, we're going to be years down the line and we'll be back to square one. It's still going to be costing the government and the taxpayer £100 million a year. So we need to do something about it, and we need to do something about it right now. So, why is the coalition pursuing a fruitless policy? As I said, I think MPs, I think ministers are misinformed. I think we need to tell them the truth about it. I believe the NFU's done some pretty intensive lobbying. Why is the NFU intent on badger culling? Well, that I don't know. The Small Farms Association isn't happy with the proposals in their current form. They want to see a change. So why is the NFU pursuing this policy? And that's something I don't know the answer to, so I'd be willing to answers on a postcard later, please. The political impact is the other thing. Now, of course, Gavin's mentioned this. 81% of people, according to our Bow Group research, were opposed to the cull. 81% of people. Just 3.5% of people were in favour of a cull. 81% of people, that's a huge proportion of this country. I mean, if someone was elected by 81%, that would be a fantastic majority. The truth is, the majority of people are opposed to the cull. The minority of people, and that's you here today, are prepared to do something about it. So I urge you, please, go to stopthecull.com, sign that petition, write to your MP. If you live in Bristol West, that's Stephen Williams. If you live in Bristol North West, that's Charlotte Leslie. If you live in Bristol East, that's Kerry McCarthy. If you live in Bristol South, that's Dawn Camarolo. Write to your MEP. Look them up. It's all online. Write to your MEP. Tell them that we need change in the European Parliament. And sign that petition. Thank you very much.